Hi guys, and welcome to the Offgrid and Connected podcast, which is dedicated to off-grid building, community, and humanitarianism. To know more about what we do, our projects, other shows, and ways you can support us or join in, go to offgrid.vision. Today's show is a good one. It's with a friend of mine who I met back in 2013 in Malawi, and her name is Deborah Binder, originally from the Canary Islands. She now lives in Taos. We talk about her story, how she got involved with earthships, how off-grid living is increasingly going mainstream, and what makes a good project. We touch on why we need community and what roadblocks people are finding at the moment in this day and age of rampant individualism. It's a real pleasure to bring you Deborah Binder. Deborah, thanks for coming on. It's great to have you here, and funny to be having a conversation after so many that's going to be recorded. But I feel like you have a lot to say about off-grid experiences and building in many different places. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. But where am I finding you? Where are you now?
Well, thanks, Patrick. It's good to talk to you too about this, even though, as you said, we've spoken about it many other times.
For sure.
I'm in Taos, New Mexico right now, where there is a huge, it's not only the central head office of Earthship Biotecture, which is, one of the most well-known off-grid communities and building methods, alternative building methods in the world, but it is also an off-grid hub, really. Taos has always been a place for renegades, for outlaws, for people that have been wanting to escape the conventional, escape the rules and the laws and do their own thing. And that naturally brings a lot of people that are interested or in off-grid living or don't have an option really, then be off-grid living as well.
For sure. We spoke to, we had a conversation with Lou before, and also Harry, who obviously doesn't live in Taos. And the last conversation I had was with Dan about permaculture. But one thing I'm interested to hear a little bit more from you about is setting up projects and finding projects. I know that we first met in Malawi in 2013. I don't know if I ever really heard the story of how you ended up there doing that.
Okay, well, it's a personal story, really. So I was living in Australia at the time. Just to give you a bit of a background, I'm, from Spain, from the Canary Islands. I'd worked in Madrid. Then I moved to Australia. I always worked in marketing and production. So kind of went back and forth between marketing, communications, PR, and production in terms of, film, event, advertising production. So those were kind of my two worlds. Worked a lot in travel and tourism, and always had a bit of a passion for making travel and tourism more sustainable. Growing up on the Canary Islands, you grow up with tourists all around all the time. And one thing that always fascinated me is, how people at home might be recycling or composting or reusing water or growing their own food or whatever little steps it is that, they're taking towards, making the environment and making the planet a better place. But once they travel, all of that tends to go out the window.
Right.
And that's something that always fascinated me. So that's kind of why I got into travel and tourism and trying to make tourism a more sustainable human activity, I guess, if you like.
So did you have any idea of what off-grid was at that point, or were you just sort of thinking more conventional, sustainable dialogues?
I kind of, growing up, we always had solar power. We always had solar hot water, for example. Growing up on a dry island, we always had water issues. So we always, in summer, had to be careful to not run out of water. And we got our water delivered through, big cistern trucks.
Did you collect water at that time?
No, well, I mean, this is a place where it used to rain that little that when it did rain, all the older ladies in the neighborhood would walk out with buckets, with all the buckets that they had to try and collect the water. So, so that's kind of how I grew up. And at the same time, seeing traditional buildings that were off-grid, that had huge underground cisterns where rainwater would be collected, that had huge volcanic rock walls for thermal mass, that were south faced to be able to, collect as much sun as they could. So in a way, I was made familiar with off-grid from a very early stage, but for me, that was kind of the normality. That wasn't, it wasn't a trend. It wasn't something that people were going, people were going towards to. And I guess that's kind of the luck of, growing up in a rural environment, that you're just naturally a lot closer to that type of living.
Sure. So you were in Australia though, a long way away from that, doing production and I guess a lot of the organizational stuff that you maybe find yourself doing now as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I was working in Australia for travel and tourism, then moved to Namibia in Southern Africa, and started working for a nonprofit organization there that worked with indigenous animals and also ran clinics in the middle of the desert. So again, we were challenged every day with how to live in an off-grid environment and at the same time run a clinic and feed 20 leopards and cheetahs and lions that we had in the sanctuary. So, it was kind of off-grid plus, I'd say. And I started promoting it's actually Namibia's only nonprofit lodge, or it was at that time. And I started promoting that because, again, out of the interest of tourism and sustainability and nonprofit kind of coming together. Then went back to Australia and started working for the South African government, for the Ministry of Tourism of South Africa, with a focus on sustainable tourism. So again, a lot of it was promoting South Africa as a tourism destination in Australia and New Zealand, but always focusing on the sustainability part of it. South Africa has very good programs in terms of green tourism and sustainable tourism, and is definitely far ahead in front of other countries, which was really interesting. And then, sorry, this is kind of a long story, so feel free to edit.
It's all good. It's all good.
And then so I was ready at some point to leave Australia. And I was going to go on a motorbike trip through South America with my boyfriend at the time. That was the plan. And he broke up with me. So at that point, I had been volunteering a little bit with Empower, which is the partner organization that Biotecture partnered with in Malawi. And I really wanted to go. So I said, okay, well, if you broke up with me, well, F you, I'm going to Malawi. And that's how I ended up there.
Wow. So you met them like before you arrived, or it was all settled that you would be doing the job you're doing? I mean, just so people know, you were
Sure.
staging Malawi, weren't you? You were getting all the stuff ready. You weren't.
I wasn't. I only went to Malawi to take footage, to do marketing. That's what I was volunteering with them for, is to help them with their fundraising and marketing. So I was only going to take footage, document the build, and so on.
Oh no, of course. Sorry, Jean was staging Malawi. That's ridiculous. I forgot that. Okay. Yeah.
But then when we got there, things were so unorganized and there were so many things missing that through my production background, I just started organizing stuff basically. And then at the end of that job, that's when, Mike Reynolds came up to me and he said, "Hey, we need somebody like you. Would you, want to work for us?" So. Wow.
So from there, you started doing other projects. I mean, a brief run through. It must have been. What would that include? So maybe the Philippines or which?
Yeah, I did the Earthship Academy in Argentina, in Ushuaia. That was the first project, the first international project. And while I was doing the academy, I already worked preparing the Philippines, which was another humanitarian effort. Then after the Philippines, we went to Canada, went back to Malawi, went back to the Philippines, did another project in Argentina, did Fiji in between, Uruguay.
Wow. So what's changed? Like, what's changed over that? Like, do you see a progression now from? I mean, we're talking about almost over 5 years, I guess. Have you seen like a big change in like the off-grid world? I feel like you have your finger on the pulse with getting so many inquiries and stuff day to day. And what changes have there been?
Absolutely. Well, it's gone from being a, in quotes, hippie thing. I think when I started working in this world, a lot of people still thought that, earthships or off-grid living is a bunch of hippies that don't shave their armpits and live in caves. To now where it's basically gone mainstream. It's a mainstream trend of people realizing if we don't do something about our planet, if we don't do something about our ecosystem, the world is not going to last as long as we thought it would, and we better do something about it. And, housing has a huge carbon footprint. So there's more and more people interested in doing this. Not only, I think, for environmental purposes, but also because people are realizing that the world is pretty screwed right now, politically talking. And there's more and more interest for people to become self-reliant, to become independent, which is incredible. It's a huge change, and it's extremely exciting. When I started with Earthship was one of the only organizations out there promoting things like this. And now there is a ton of different organizations and companies and councils dedicated to off-grid living. And it's extremely exciting, and, gives me goosebumps that we're living in the world that we are at the stage that we are, where we still have the possibility of, making this world a little bit better for our kids.
Yeah. Who do you think's spearheading that? I mean, Earthship's been a sort of mainstay in the sort of radically sustainable building, and I think building with trash, as Mike does, is particularly loud in its message. But there are a lot of other realities now. You've got straw bale and rammed earth and all of this stuff. What are the ones that come to mind when you think of exciting organizations that people might not have heard of?
Well, I think, it depends. I mean, off-grid living or sustainable living encompasses a lot of different things. It's everything from recycling the water through the efficient energy usage to using solar and wind to, using recycled materials. There's so many different aspects of it that I think there is more and more organizations that are specifically, becoming important in each one of those areas. Tesla, for example, being one of them, just with electric cars and home batteries now. That's, incredible what they're doing about it.
That's the real mainstream example, isn't it, Tesla? And then it seems like there's a whole spectrum. And so where do you think the most realistic way is, or the way that's going to have the biggest effect, in the sense that I read a UN report recently that was saying the future of food is going to be small organic gardens. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, that's interesting that with all, the innovation and stuff, the UN is saying that. I mean, is it going to be small realities, or is it going to be like big Tesla-like things, or obviously probably a mix of both? But where do you where are your preferences on that spectrum?
I think it's definitely a combination of both. But yeah, having said that, I think, food production and becoming independent in terms of food is where it's at right now. That at least has been my obsession over the last few months. Permaculture, food production. For the first time last year, there was a bigger exodus in the United States only. There was a bigger exodus from cities to the countryside, then from the countryside to the cities among young people. I think the bracket was 20 to 35 years old or something like that. And it's a lot of young people that are buying up farms to, start growing their own food, which is incredible, and I see that in my day-to-day environment, the people you talk to, the people that you're around with, even if you talk to the older generations, if you talk to people the age of your parents or of your grandparents, they're, even starting to see it. Oh, wow, it makes sense that we're independent. It makes sense that we produce our own electricity and don't have to be paying these electricity bills that are just getting higher and higher and are probably going to be even more, going to be increasing even more. And it makes sense that we grow our own food instead of, buying them at the grocery store where we don't know what hormones and antibiotics have been, put into them. So that's, I feel like it's a huge movement. Some people are calling it the transition. It's a global transition. So, and I totally agree with that. And as much as there's different people from, different backgrounds and income levels and interests and jobs, there's also going to be an array of different ways of getting there. I might be a CEO of whatever of American Express in Australia, and I might buy a home battery because I don't have time for any other stuff, but I'm still interested, and that's the way I'm going about it. Or I might be a young guy that just got out of high school, and I'm got access to my grandparents' farm, and I'm going to grow my own food. It doesn't really matter how you get there. It's just becoming a lifestyle more than a trend, and that's what's exciting about it.
Yeah, I hear you. It seems like there's a status that's coming with it as well, where people are almost tiring of self-publication and virtual status and online status. And when someone walks in and goes, yeah, this is my honey, I know how to do honey, or I know how to collect water, or I know how to heat my own house, or people look at that and go, whoa, that's pretty cool. And that's the way it's always been in the past. I mean, someone who's valuable to the village was someone who could do loads of different things. But it seems like that's coming back. Do you agree?
Absolutely, yeah. And the whole trade thing is becoming bigger as well, in that sense, for sure.
The whole what thing?
Trading. So not having to buy anything, but if you have fresh eggs and I'm making honey, that we start trading things, which is how it used to be, before the whole industrial revolution. So
yeah, I mean, I worked it out here in Italy, where if you make 2,000 euros, I think your company's probably paid at least that to have you. So the value of your work is maybe 4,000 euros. Mm-hmm. And then you then get taxed on your 2,000 for your income. You pay VAT, you pay tax on your house, you buy a beer, you pay tax on that. There's loads of tax on petrol. And if you add up all the taxes, you probably end up choosing what to do with 15% of the income from your work. So right. All of the rest of it goes back. And so when you do trade an egg for some honey, you're actually gaining 85% or something on that trade compared to using money for it, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's a very interesting and very true way of looking at it, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. What always gets me, is that we used to have all of this. What happened? Well, I mean, we all know what happened. History tells, but it's like, how horrible is this that the world got that we used to have all this, obviously with what came with it too, with diseases and pests and whatever else, but we used to have that type of lifestyle, and then today we're here where we're having to re-educate ourselves and re-educate other people to go back to what people used to be like for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's kind of sarcastic, ironic in a way.
No, it is. It is crazy, but there's also like a modern twist on everything as well, isn't there? With there being better solar panels, and with there being loads of different technologies that seem to be coming up and being a little bit better than they once were. It's like that swan that's trying to get off the water and it's just beating its wings, and you just think it's going to fly. It's at that point.
Yeah, sure. And having the internet to share all of these things, that I can, jump on YouTube and somebody can teach me how to collect honey, that's thousands of miles away from here. I mean, that's incredible. And, that's another trend that I'm seeing. And you touched on it briefly, is that, people are documenting what they are doing and almost bragging about it and trying to teach other people how to do that. It's like people are doing it for themselves first and then for other people. It's kind of like, when you sit on a plane and they tell you to put your oxygen mask on first before you help others. And, I could completely see that happening with, all these trends via the internet and via social media, which is, as much as the same people are trying to get away from it, but it's a great benefit to have, nowadays. So.
How do you see passing that on to other people in the future, in the next, let's say, couple or even up to 5 years? What do you think you'll be doing for that process?
Well, I mean, as I said, my obsession lately has been, growing food and becoming independent in terms of being able to produce my own food and then, sharing that with other people too. I do think that we all have a responsibility of keeping on educating other people that are not aware of all of this, both adults, and I think that is happening already finally, where, those people who still think that this is all about a bunch of hippies living in caves are now seeing that, off-grid living can be as comfortable as any conventional type of housing living. And two, educating children. I think integrating this type of knowledge into the school systems, showing kids the importance of growing their own food, what they can do with it, renewables, energies, and so on is extremely important.
Yeah. Have you seen much of that where you are now in Taos? Have you seen much of the kids aspect coming through?
No.
Yeah, interesting.
The whole education system is I think that's going to be a really tough one to crack, It was really interesting in that aspect to be part of the Uruguay Airship project, because it wasn't only about the building. It was about changing the educational curriculum on a national basis. The kids that live in that Airship school now have classes on permaculture and food production and so on, but that's also integrated in the classes that other kids that, go to normal schools are receiving, which is amazing.
It is. Yeah, Cole was telling me about that the other day in a conversation. He was saying in Victoria in Canada, kids are learning permaculture.
Yeah, and again, if you ask people, our parents, our grandparents, what they learned in school, they had a lot more, they got a lot more practical knowledge than what we get now. They learned cooking and they learned mechanics and, they learned all this very practical things that are in many places, unfortunately, are not part of the curriculum anymore. So, yeah, going back to basics again.
There's a great joy, isn't there, of learning the practical stuff. Like, you must have seen that on builds when people first do that one practical thing, having not done stuff since they were maybe a kid. It's confidence building, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. I count myself into that group as well. I had no idea how to use a hammer 10 years ago, That's, and I'm still not very good at it, but, it's it's definitely a change for many people, It's like a lot of people get educated to kind of live this corporate lives in cities and so on and make lots of money and whatever. And then seeing those same people pound a tire, or working on plumbing, it's great. It's so much fun just to see people doing that. And I totally agree with you that for sure it is confidence building, because it just shows you that you can do things on your own. It makes you more independent. It makes that, even if at my house now I have a plumbing issue, I might not have to call my dad or my boyfriend or whoever it is. I could probably do it myself, and that's it. Just, yeah, seeing that happening in other people is really cool and a lot of fun.
Yeah. What about the people that have come, you've seen so many people coming through Taos and doing the academy and taking part in projects around the world. So you've seen, obviously, what I'm saying is you've seen a really big sea change almost in the numbers of people. I mean, the academy must be 300 a year or something close to that. And then with the other builds as well. What do you see, to get strategic for a second? What do you see as the next step in that process? Or is it a question of just continuing it and it will naturally become exponential as people teach other people?
Yeah, I think it is more of a natural, organically growing thing now. I think that's what needs to happen. I don't think that one organization, be it Earthship or whoever it is going to have all the answers to how to make this planet a better place, or is going to have the latest technology in order to do that. I think, once again, that it has to be a crowd-based movement in a way where the internet helps a lot with getting those learnings and those processes together. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day that it's kind of a shame that there is no big organization for alternative construction out there, and that's something that really is missing. I've kind of been obsessing lately with this organization called the World Green Building Council. I don't know if you've ever heard of them before.
Yeah,
if not,
I
strongly
tell us
recommend
about
them.
it. Yeah, tell us about it.
Yeah, so they're basically encouraging local and regional green building councils getting formed around the world, and trying to share different initiatives to achieve buildings becoming greener. Again, this is not off-grid that we're talking about. This is, just more energy efficient, less contaminating. It's definitely a step in the right direction. I don't think it has the following yet that it could have. I don't think it has reached its largest potential yet. But I feel like that is something that we need more of, is to have platforms where all these different organizations that are trying to, teach about off-grid living and are experimenting with alternative construction and off-grid living can share their knowledge, and also the people around it, the people wanting to experience it.
Yeah, we're still in young days in terms of there still feels like a lot of resistance to off-grid stuff. It does still have a bit of a hairy armpit hippie thing that you mentioned earlier. But at the same time, it is going more mainstream, but that resistance feels like the resistance of a dying way of doing things. So what is it that could happen? I mean, you mentioned the World Green Building Council, but what else would be a good way of making that kind of stuff go quicker? Like, what are the blocks? Is it money? Is it just mentality? Is it education?
Well, a lot of it is, the permitting behind it, and permitting. What is permitting? My own opinion is that a lot of the permitting has to do with the money that corporations can make out of it. Having said that, I come from, a very corrupt country, unfortunately, where things like that happen a lot. But,
Sure.
That's what, if you look at permitting, that's what a lot of it is about, and that's, and the same applies to electricity and energy, for example. In Spain, until not too long, there was a so-called tax to the sun. There's basically a monopoly of electricity companies in Spain, and they didn't want people to go off grid. They didn't want people to have their own solar panels on the roof. So whoever had a solar panel had to pay a tax.
Wow.
And that's a lot of the barriers that are still there, is that unfortunately we don't live in a democracy. We live in a corporocracy, you could call it, where corporations and companies and their benefits and them making the big money is ruling our world and our lifestyle. So
yeah, that's been something that we've been hearing since we were teenagers, hasn't it? With no logo and all of that stuff in '97, and then the rallies against the G8 and stuff. But it feels to me like we're still, I say we, as in people who maybe want to go off grid or live more harmoniously with the planet, regardless of whether it's off grid or on grid. But people who are, let's say, it feels like a Star Wars film that's sort of beginning to play out now, with the resistance and the empire, etc., etc. But the one area that to me I haven't got my head around at all, and I've never I don't meet many people, maybe because I don't go to the right places, but it's the C word, community, and how that is going to have to grow with our ability to be off grid. What's just in general, like what have been your experiences of community over the years, whether it's in Taos or where you were in Spain and the Canaries or Australia, Africa? What have you seen?
Well, I've seen both, I think. I've seen people that have put community first, or that see, community as a big part of this whole movement, which is what it should be. I personally don't think this movement can go anywhere if we don't start applying sustainability to personal relations and community and, treating each other better.
I totally agree with that. And it just seems to be such a big issue with how people relate in groups and self-organize. And what have you seen? Have you seen any places that have worked really well, in your opinion, or?
I think I've seen both. I've seen places where it's never really been organized. But I've seen places where organically it's just been a big part of it all, just because of the nature of the people that were part of that community. And unfortunately, I've also seen the other side, where people really just, think about their own benefits and are kind of taking advantage a little bit of this whole movement for their own benefit, and don't put community as a big part of it. So I think I've seen both, but I want to say, and I'm not 100% sure, Patrick, if that's just wishful thinking or not, but I want to say that I've seen a bigger focus on community over the past few years in general.
I think definitely, but I think it's still just at the very beginning. The one community I've seen has been my daughter's school, which has been a Steiner school that got set up with, 20 people or 12 people and then 24. And then when we arrived, there were 55 people, nice. Children. Yeah, and now there's 130. But just seeing how people have to learn to communicate, learn to organize, all of these basics, that's what I think we should be teaching at schools, rather than knowledge that you can find on Google in 2 seconds.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And, and it's funny as well to see the differences in culture and in educational systems, with how I have traveled around, how there is, cultures where community is a much, bigger thing in it, where in the United States, for example, I feel like there's a huge focus on individualism throughout the education system, and it's all about what you are doing and you, and, in Latin countries, for example, or, you're in Italy and Spain, South America, there's already a much bigger focus on community and friends and family and so on, so I totally agree with you that should be a big part of it, a much bigger part of it. And, I see that a lot. I see a lot of people my age that are kind of at the phase now in their life where they're like, what am I doing with my life? Where should I go from here? What should I do with my life? And they're kind of suffering from having too many options, really, of what they could do. But it never really crosses their mind of like, oh, well, if I got together with this person and that person and that person who's kind of in the same situation as I am, we could be building or forming something between us, between all of us, instead of just be, sitting in our silos, getting more and more depressed because we don't know what we want gonna do or what we can do by ourselves.
Yeah, it's difficult to recognize. I believe people find it difficult to recognize what makes them happy, like what makes them really happy. Just comparing the feeling of buying something new and the feeling of seeing something grow. They're very different feelings in the immediate, but over time, there's so much more satisfaction in seeing something grow, whether it's, a field of plants or whether it's obviously a child, but that's a bit of a different issue, but it's not it's not even an issue, obviously. But
depends on who you're talking to.
I can totally see myself editing this section out. But getting back to community, South America always struck me as somewhere that was going places on a more community. It seems more just well, that's not true. It's not more just because there's so much weirdness politically, but the people seem very focused on changing the world in a way that, let's say, a lot of Europeans maybe aren't, or Americans aren't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, again, I don't want to be insulting anybody here. By the way, I don't want to be insulting anybody with hairy armpits either. I have nothing against hairy armpits. Just putting that out there. You gotta be careful with what you say here lately. I think, though, that having in South America, there's a huge social gap between rich and poor historically, and there's a big, and you touched on it. There's a lot of unfairness politically, in people not getting treated well. And historically, it's been like that for a long time. So, that revolution that we were talking about earlier and the resistance and all that is, I think, a lot, more prone to happen in places where there's where a lot of people are living such disadvantage. Might be a passive resistance or peaceful resistance or whatever it is. But I totally agree with you that, I see that a lot in South America, and I think it has a lot to do with that.
Well, maybe people are starting to fight for something in South America somehow, rather than as fighting against. I mean, there really seemed to be a whole, like the World Social Forum is there. There seemed to be there seems to be a whole movement almost. But then I haven't been there for a number of years now, so I'm not very qualified to speak about it. But let's get smaller. Let's get smaller than countries and geopolitics and stuff. In your opinion, what makes a happy group? You've been on so many trips now. Do you have a list of characteristics that people might have that make things better, or do you have, are there some things where you see a couple of people and think, uh-oh, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, do you mean just in terms of character and people and like people's traits?
Yeah, dynamics in the group. When you're building, what makes a good group? What makes a happy group?
Definitely humor. I think that's another thing that's happening a lot in our world is that things are becoming way too serious, and that's, I think, something that has to do as well with, you just spoke about South America, and obviously we're both generalizing here because South America is huge, but people from South America tend to have a more laid back, less serious, more humorous view of the world and way of doing things, than people in the more Anglo-Saxon world, I should say. So definitely a good sense of humor is key, I think, and not taking yourself too seriously. It's something that I always appreciate when I go back to the Canary Islands, where I'm originally from, just seeing how everything is taken with a sense of humor, and people are able to laugh at themselves. And I think that's key, to being able to grow something and to be able to form a good community. I think the whole, just taking, again, the sense of individualism and taking yourself too seriously can immediately destroy any sense of community anywhere.
Well, that's what gets set up very quickly on a build. I mean, the humor and the lightheartedness, the play hard and work hard thing definitely helps the atmosphere. Other things I've noticed, though, are people's willingness to really pitch in towards a common goal.
Right.
That's something that's very strong, I think, on builds compared to even companies where people are often trying to do their own thing. With the build, everyone knows what the end goal is. It's pretty clear. I'm trying to think of other examples. I felt like Nepal was a very humble group, which was quite nice. Like a lot of characters, but there was no jostling for position or no, these are all things that I think are the basics that we're trying to get ourselves ready for when it comes to living in smaller groups. Would you ever contemplate living in a community?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I would love to live in a place where, again, what we were talking about earlier, where you have different people that are all part of one very well working community, but every person in that community can contribute something else in their own way, with each one of them being equally important to the group, no matter what they're contributing. I also think, what you said earlier about Nepal is that the beauty about helping somebody else makes a big difference to a group as well. I mean, I've seen, builds with a humanitarian purpose where the building is for a good cause and built for a community or for somebody else. And then I've seen builds for private purposes, where a group of people get together to build somebody's home, for example. And they're both beautiful experiences, don't get me wrong, but in one of them you have a bunch of people that are doing this for somebody else, and in the second example you have people that are doing it for their own benefit because they want to learn how to do this themselves. Maybe it is to then teach other people, but the purpose for them to be there is just completely different. So that makes a huge difference as well, I think, in terms of building a community and the whole group dynamic, I should say.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's a big difference in someone's likelihood to be ready to carry buckets if they're doing it for a humanitarian cause than if they're there to learn. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
That's the one thing, I guess, that separates two types of builds that we're used to hearing about.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think this whole movement is dependent on community, and it's dependent on our will or our willingness to get together and do this as a group. I don't think anybody is going to be able to do this by themselves. And I think those organizations that are trying to do that or that are trying to do this for their own benefit are the ones that are either already crumbling or that are going to be left behind, because this is all about community at the end of the day.
Yeah, totally. So if you had a big budget, we were just talking about different possibilities before we started recording, but if you had a big budget, what do you think you'd do with it, given your experience now?
I have a kind of a personal objective or wish where I would love to do something is in South Africa. I told you before that I used to work for the South African Ministry of Tourism, and they're very good in terms of developing sustainability down there. But so I have a personal affinity to the country as a whole. But I also see that they have huge issues, especially lately. I don't know if you've seen that they've got their water use restricted now because of the 3-year drought that the whole country has been in.
Terrible.
So there's actually restrictions on how much water you can use. Same with energy. It's really difficult. At the same time, you have a huge gap between people that are living in townships, and the richer side of the country. So what I would love to do, and I was just talking to somebody about that the other day, is to be able to do a big project inside a township and being able to make people that live in these townships more independent and more self-sustainable. I think that would be huge. And that would be a huge example, not only for, South Africa to follow, but also for, all other big cities or countries where there is a situation like that, where there's favelas or townships or whatever. So that's kind of my own, I guess, pet peeve, or not pet peeve, but the one needle in my heart that I still need to get out, and I think that's where I would focus on if I did have access to a lot of funds right now.
That sounds similar to I often think about the refugees and how a lot of their camps are very much not, well, they're permanent camps. I mean, I think last year maybe 2% of the world's refugees went home or something crazy like that. We tend to see it in terms of being temporary, but it's not. And therefore, just like the favelas or townships, it would be great to see these camps, collecting water and using permaculture and certainly sanitation, whether it's biodigesters or compost toilets or whatever. That would be cool to make scalable, wouldn't it? With a bit of money and a bit of some good brains behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love to do it in an African country. I still feel very fond to Africa as a whole. So and I think there's a lot of initiatives already in different African countries that we can learn from. I mean, in just little things. I don't know, just as an anecdote, I guess I learned the other day that in Morocco now they have banned the use of plastic bags.
Yeah, they did that in Kenya, I think, as well recently.
Yeah, but up to the point where they just don't produce any plastic bags anymore in the whole country.
Yeah, it's interesting. And there's always some really weird downsides that you hear about afterwards. But in general, it sounds great, doesn't it? Just to not have plastic bags waving from the trees.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and when I walk into the grocery store here in the US, in a developed town, I get 5 plastic bags too many that I don't really need because they wrap every single item into a plastic bag, And I don't know. I feel like, I used to think that it is the more civilized countries that need to set an example for the communities or regions or countries that are still developing. But now I'm starting to see that it has to be the other way around.
Yeah, I think I'd like the idea of people from more difficult conditions skipping ahead. I mean, in Africa, they're famous for having skipped, the landlines and moved to mobile. And the way they've used their mobiles has often been very revolutionary in terms of keeping tabs on election booths or using them and using them for money transactions. They were doing way before we were. So I feel like there's a lot in there, and the added benefit is once they do something better than we do it, then it can be a lot of incentive if we get to hear about it, because we don't hear about many people doing stuff better than us, even though there are loads of examples.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I completely agree with you. Yeah.
Where was it? I think wasn't it Iceland that were the first people to get the 2008 crash happening. And they did a whole bunch of steps that meant they got back on their feet. And then the English, I remember, were moaning and whinging about the Icelanders not paying them back some money. And they wrote so many articles about it. They never once wrote an article about Iceland's solution to the crisis, which was, amazing.
Yeah, and I mean that again, that there just shows you that a lot of people don't want you and I to know how those things happen. That there's so much corporate interest there. There's a lot of people that don't want that information to be public or to go mainstream. To have people think, oh, why are we not doing that? What Iceland is doing?
Is this your direction you're going to keep on taking? Do you think you'll end up going back to, well, you wouldn't go back to maybe what you're doing before, but do you think you'll change direction towards food? Where do you think you're heading?
I'm not 100% sure yet. I mean, as you know, I just bought a little off-grid house on the Canary Islands, and I definitely want to, kind of have that place as my stability, my root, and where I can experiment with a lot of these things, where I want to grow food and I want to look more into, different types of alternative building, and then kind of from there see where that takes me. I know for sure that I'm going to stay in this, can you call it an industry? I don't know. In this
sector.
Yeah, I guess this industry. But I'm not 100% sure yet how or in what way that might be. I might be, making kombucha and selling that and at the local market and trading it for eggs. Or I might, stay in alternative construction. I'm very interested in rammed earth at the moment because I think it's a beautiful construction method and it's permitted in a lot of places. And it's also thousands of years old, that construction method. So, I might be going into that area a little bit more. I definitely would love to keep on doing humanitarian projects, helping other communities. As I said before, I think we all have a huge responsibility to educate other people and educating sounds a little bit like, it's coming from the top down, but to share the knowledge that we already have with other people, I guess. I've never been a very focused person, but that's kind of where it is going right now. Definitely trying to be able to be independent from a food perspective, sharing knowledge, and then kind of see where else that goes. And still very interested in the whole travel and tourism, sustainable travel and tourism part for sure. I think, people are never going to stop traveling. And it's incredible already to see a change. I see a lot of couples, for example, now that for their honeymoon, they go to do woofing somewhere or go and volunteer somewhere or go to an airship build or whatever it is. And I think, that's something really cool. I think if we can combine tourism more with, what we're trying to achieve here as a whole, there could be a lot of benefits both sides there. So yeah.
Oh, totally. Did you ever hear about those timeshare deals? I think there were a lot of English doing that in Spain years ago.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Can you imagine like a timeshare where you essentially all get together and build a place and then take it in turns to stay there? That would be pretty cool, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I remember even as a kid when people were talking about timeshare and it had a lot of negativity about it. And I remember thinking, well, if this is done well, and if this is regulated well, and if the people that are doing it have a similar mindset, I think it's genius. I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, no, it could be really interesting. You like turn up and stay in the house and tend to the garden and, pay it forwards essentially to the next people that come.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a little bit what woofing is about. And it's taking woofing kind of to I think woofing has done a lot to, what we were talking about earlier, to create or start to create this community of people where people that are available and want to learn can go and can hear about other projects and so on. And, I think, growing that type of community or developing in a way that it is more focused on off-grid living and construction, would be a great way forward.
Yeah, one of my last questions I have for you, I suppose, is one about how organic this process is and how much it misses or could use direction, as opposed to how maybe that's a good thing and that's why it's a sea change and it's not going to be led from a top-down approach. Because woofing strikes me as something where so many people are exchanging information and learning from each other and then passing on that information. But it's also got a certain structure to it. It's got a global site. It's got structure that makes it possible as well. Do you think there's much room for improving? Not improving. That's not a nice question to ask. But do you think there's other areas where the same kind of dynamic can apply? There must be.
Yeah, and I think, having it, woofing is very focused on food and on gardening and on permaculture. I think having a similar community for off-grid living and construction could be even much bigger. And I do agree with you. I think it needs to be organic. It needs to be community driven, because if it is one big umbrella organization or even a company that starts this, then we're only going to end up, with the same problems that we've created in this world already. So sure, yes, there needs to be more structure, but it needs to be community-driven structure. And I think about that a lot, and I think that's a huge challenge, that we're faced with nowadays.
Well, do you have any books or places to go to find out more about this challenge or to explore this challenge more?
Well, there's a lot out there about off-grid building, off-grid living, water catchment, water use, and so on, water harvesting. I've become really interested in that lately because, obviously water harvesting is the biggest thing if you want to grow your own food. But in terms of the whole community aspect of it, to be honest, I think it's the only way of really learning more about it is interacting with other people and, having a conversation like the one you and I are having right now.
Sure. Well, listen, in terms of when it comes to learning, I've done a lot of that from you, so I'm going to say thank you for that. And thank you for the conversation. Is there anything?
Thank you.
Is there anything you'd want, sort of any requests or suggestions you might have before signing off?
Can I request a song and say hi to my mom?
Sure. We'll organize that straight away.
No, I mean, I just think it's great what you're doing. And I, thank you and congratulate you for the initiative that you've taken with these podcasts, because I think that's a great way forward in, sharing information and going towards the goal that we all seem to have in common. So thank you.
Cool. Well, thank you. We'll speak soon.
Yeah, for sure. Let's keep on maybe having this conversation with a beer or so at some point.
Absolutely. See you, Deborah.
All right. Thanks, Patrick.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Before you go, or rather immediately after you've gone, please go down to iTunes, leave a review, help us grow, get more guests, raise more money for projects. We have other projects coming up. You can find news about those on offgrid.vision, where you can also get access to other shows and some phenomenal t-shirts which go towards, the profit of which goes towards new projects. If you have any requests for someone to come on the show, do let me know via the site. Until next time, thanks for listening and see you soon.